Isaiah chapter 20 this morning. You may as well go ahead and put a thumb or a bookmark in 2 Kings chapter 15. We'll be spending a lot of time in 2 Kings 15, 17, 18, and 19. 2 Kings 15, 17, 18, and 19. But we'll start reading here in Isaiah chapter 20 in verse 1. It says, "In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod, and took it, at the same time spake the Lord by Isaiah the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years, for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners, and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia their expectation, and of Egypt their glory. And the same inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape?" So, going back up to verse 1, it says, "In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod," and then it says, "When Sargon, king of Assyria, sent him and fought against Ashdod and took it." So, this verse here was interesting to me for a few reasons. One, because Sargon, this is the only time you see his name mentioned in the Bible anywhere. Sargon of Assyria was basically thought to have not existed. They thought that this verse was either made up, or that the name was wrong, that somebody made a mistake, that there was something wrong here. No, they eventually found the cuneiform tablets, or cuneiform, however you want to pronounce it, the clay tablets. They found some of those that had some inscriptions from Sargon's time as king. And so, again, Bible proven to be historically correct. And so we see here that Sargon was fighting against Ashdod. Now, Ashdod, if you remember, often associated with the city Ashkelon. Ashdod and Ashkelon, those were the two big cities, the two primary cities of the Philistines. Today, their sites are in the Gaza Strip. So if you want to know where that's at, that's where it's at. It's just right there southwest of the territories owned and controlled by Israel. And then I saw this, it says, "In the year that Tartan came into Ashdod." Tartan is not an actual person. Tartan is just a title. You see that title. We'll talk about it. I will go ahead and talk about it now. 2 Kings chapter 18. 2 Kings chapter 18, we'll hit this again here in a minute, but 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 13 through 17. 2 Kings 18, verses 13 through 17 says, "Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah, and took them. And Hezekiah king of Judah sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return from me, that which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed Hezekiah king of Judah 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars which Hezekiah king of Judah overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabsaris and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem, and when they were come up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field. So, at this time, when this was going on, this Tartan was also sent, went to Jerusalem, and we're not going to read it this morning, but basically they sit there and they yell at the people in the city and say, you're going through all this trouble, you're going through all this hardship. If you just revolt against your king and you come out here and be one of us, we'll take you to another land. We'll let you stay here for a little bit. You can enjoy yourself, and then we'll take you to another land that's just like yours. and you can just be happy under our empire. That was their basic ploy there, but this tartan was there with them. Now that word tartan, it actually comes from an ancient Akkadian word called turtanu, and then in the language of the Jewish people, in the Hebrew language, it becomes tartan or tartan. And basically what that turtanu was, what this tartan is, it's like the second in command. The way that Assyria worked for generations, it was tradition for every single year, the king of Assyria would go out and lead a military conflict against somebody and try to conquer some place every year. Whenever fighting season came in after the winter, they'd get the troops mustered, they'd go out, and they'd do it every year. I've stood up here 100 times and said Assyria is a very warlike people. That is how they are a warlike people. They go out and they do military campaigns every single year. The chief of staff, the commander-in-chief, the whatever you want to call them, that's the tartan. The tartan basically has full command over the military, superseded only by the king. And in some points of Assyrian history, not even superseded by the king. Sometimes the king didn't even have enough influence to overrule the tartan. The tartan just had full run of the entire military in some cases. But that's so that when you see here in Isaiah chapter 20, in the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon king of Assyria sent him and fought against Ashdod and took it. So Sargon, the king of Assyria at this time, sent his second in command to go do his bidding for him. That's what happened here. So now before we move on into verse 2, I want to get into a little bit of history of Assyria. Not much. We're not going to go into great detail like we did with Egypt. We're not going to and look and see everywhere where Egypt is mentioned, basically in relation to the Jewish people. We're just going to go and try to get an understanding of the order of events that occur here. So the first major Assyrian king that we see in Scripture, we see in about 2 Kings chapter 15. 2 Kings chapter 15. Second Kings 15, verses 29 through 31. And his name is Tiglath-Pileser, Tiglath-Pileser, however you want to pronounce it. You'll probably say it wrong just like me. Official name of this person is Tiglath-Pileser III. So we see here in verse 29 of 2 Kings 15, it says, In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon, and Abel-Beth-Maacah, and Janoah, and Kedesh, and Hazor, and Gilead, and Galilee, all the land of Naphtali, and carried them captive to Assyria. And Hoshea, the son of Elah, made a conspiracy against Pekah, the son of Remaliah, and smote him, and slew him, and reigned in his stead in the 20th year of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. And the rest of the acts of Pekah and all that he did, behold, they are written in the books of the chronicles of the kings of Israel. So that name Pekah should sound familiar. It was Pekah, the king of Israel, and Rezin, again, you'll probably be wrong just like me. It was those two that made an alliance against Judah. And so he was a king of Israel. That should tell you something. There were no good kings of Israel. He was not a good person. He was not a godly person. He was the exact opposite. He was an evil person who he served idols, but really he served himself. That's what all the kings of Israel did. Anytime you see that they were worshiping idols or serving idols, it's not because they thought that those idols were so great and grand and wonderful that they deserved to be served. It's because they thought that those idols would bring them fortune. That's what it came down to. So that is the first mention of Tiglath-Pileser there. he's basically, he has come against and he's taken the entire land of Naphtali. So I said 15, 17, 18, and 19. I meant 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. If you look in 2 Kings 16, verses 7 through 10. 2 Kings 16, verses 7 through 10, and this is right after Rezin. This is before Pekah's death, but it's right after Rezin and Pekah tried to attack Judah. It says, "So Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria, and out of the hand of the king of Israel, which rise up against me. And Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus, and took it, and carried the people of it captive to Kir, and slew Rezin. And King Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and saw an altar that was at Damascus. And King Ahaz sent to Urijah the priest the fashion of the altar, and the pattern of it, according to all the workmanship thereof." So, again, Ahaz, not one of the good kings of Judah. He went about this the entirely wrong way. But what happened was, he was being attacked by Rezin and Pekah, and he just thought, you know what, I'll just pay this king of Assyria to come deal with this for me. I'll just pledge allegiance to him and give tribute and just make a payment, and he'll come and he'll protect me. Did not go to God, did not pray to God, did not seek after God at all in this. His first thought was to go to another wicked person in order to try to get salvation. And it worked out in the short term. Did not work out in the long term. So that's basically the big relationship that Tiglath-Pileser had with Israel. Now if you look at 2 Kings chapter 17, we'll look through verses 1 through 8 here. 2 Kings 17, verses 1 through 8. Now it says, "In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea the son of Elah to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. Against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, and Hoshea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hoshea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land, and went up to Samaria, and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried away into Assyria, and placed them in Halah and in Habor, by the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt, and had feared other gods, and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel, which they had made." So here we see the end of the northern kingdom of Israel. This is the end of it. That's it. There's no more. And this is in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah. And what we see is this king now called Shalmaneser. This is either Tiglath-Pileser's son, or it's somebody who just decided to take the throne from him when he died. There's really not very good record of the succession of the kings of Assyria. We just know who the kings were. We don't really know for sure whether each one of them were related or not. There's very little to go on. Again, for all of Assyrian history, we have the Bible, and then we have the clay tablets. You know what doesn't last very long? Clay tablets. So there's very few of them compared to how many they would have actually written, how many they would have actually, carved out. There's just not a lot of information. The best source of information that we have as Christians is going to be the Bible. So What we saw here was Hoshea, this king of Israel. He tried to make an agreement with So. He was a pharaoh. He was a king of Egypt. And he'd always given tribute to Assyria year by year. He decided, you know what, I'm not going to do this. We can make an alliance with Egypt, and we'll just take over these Assyrian people. How about that? It didn't work out, as we know. If you look at 2 Kings chapter 18, back to chapter 18. We'll see this here again, just reiterated, verses 9 and 10. It says, "And it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it. And at the end of the 3 years they took it, even in the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was taken." And so we've seen, for a large part of these events, we've seen Ahaz was king of Judah. Now we see Hezekiah is king of Judah. We saw that Pekah was king of Israel, and then we saw that Hoshea was the final king of Israel. And he basically became king of Israel, as we read. He murdered the previous king in conspiracy and took over the throne, and then he didn't keep it for very long. So it says in verse 11 and 12 here, it says, "And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel unto Assyria, and put them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan in the cities of the Medes, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant, and all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. The Lord commanded, and would not hear them, nor do them." So we've gone from Tiglath-Pileser to Shalmaneser. Now, directly after Shalmaneser, the one that we read about in Isaiah chapter 20, Sargon is king. Okay? Now, after he's king, there's another person, probably the most famous Assyrian king in the whole Bible, Sennacherib. So, we'll read about him momentarily. But 2 Kings, we'll look again here at 2 Kings 18, 13 through 17. We just read 11 and 12. Now in verse 13 it says, "Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended, return from me. That which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold." So what we see here, Hezekiah came up against a hard place. He was threatened. He gave them this money. And then if you read the rest of chapter 18, which we won't have time for this morning, Hezekiah and the people ended up trusting in the Lord. You know, they gave them the tribute, but they didn't give them the tribute because they wanted to serve them. They gave them the tribute because that's what they demanded. There really wasn't much else to do there. And so that's what he did. Now, if you look in chapter 19 of 2 Kings, chapter 19, now there was, in all of that trusting of the Lord, there was a lot of prayer. There's a lot that happens in the rest of chapter 18 and at the beginning of chapter 19. There's a lot of prayer there. We'll actually look at chapter 19, verse 20. It says, "Then Isaiah the son of Amoz sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, That which thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib king of Assyria I have heard. This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. The virgin daughter of Zion hath despised thee, and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed, and against whom hast thou exalted thy voice, and lifted up thine eyes on high, even against the Holy One of Israel?" And so Hezekiah knew that he shouldn't take it personally. Hezekiah knew that he shouldn't take it as though Judah has been insulted, because it was not Judah who was insulted by the king of Assyria. It's God who was insulted by the king of Assyria, because he thought in all his high and mightiness that he would just be able to come in and take this place that belonged to God. God had not given him the privilege, the ability, the command to do so. God would later allow people to come in and take Judah. Those would be the Babylonians. But it wasn't yet. God did not believe it was time for Judah's judgment yet. Remember Hezekiah at the time. There's not many of them, but there were a few good kings of Judah. Hezekiah was one of them. As far as you can say that a king is good, Hezekiah was a good king. So now in 2 Kings chapter 19, verses 35 to 37, it says, "And it came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went out and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000, and when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses." So before we read 36 and 37, what happened there was at the nighttime, God just sent an angel. We don't know how high-ranking the angel was. We don't know the name of the angel. We just know that he sent an angel, and the angel killed 185,000 people in one night. Maybe the angel had some kind of subordinates along with him. Maybe the angel was just really fast and did it all himself. We don't get that level of detail. What we know is God sent this angel. The angel was sent to do a duty. The angel killed 185,000 people. Now let's look what happened. It says in verse 36, "So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed, and went and returned and dwelt at Nineveh." He had nothing else to do. There was nothing he could do. 185,000 people died. It says at the end of verse 35, "And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses." Now it says in verse 37, "And it came to pass, as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adremelech and Sharezer his son smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia. And Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead." So even Sennacherib, even this great one who was to come against Judah, he was going to try to take Jerusalem, he fell. You can't stand before God. You can't do it. He was defeated, and he was defeated swiftly. So what we see here is that there's the first king, Tiglath-Pileser. He had a deal with the people of Judah. He ended up taking, it was him and then Shalmaneser. They ended up taking the 10 northern tribes. Shalmaneser was the one ultimately responsible for that. And then there was Sargon II. You don't see very much about him at all in the Bible. You see he's mentioned in one place. There's very little that you see about him in history. Basically, he didn't do a lot relating to Israel, to Judah, to that part of the country, that part of the world. What little he did was related to the Philistines, which is now the Gaza Strip. A lot of what he did was mostly focused over toward Babylon, because at the time Babylon was under Assyria. And so they were trying to keep that whole region of Babylon under control, and there were revolts after revolts after revolts. So again, the Assyrian kings went out to battle every year. It wasn't always to conquer new territory. Sometimes it was just to subjugate the ones that already belonged to them, to make sure they put them in line and kept them in their place from their point of view. So, but while this Sargon, king of Assyria, has his Tartan, his second in command, in Ashdod in the land of the Philistines, which, side note, the Philistines, according to the clay tablets that were written by the Assyrians, the Philistines tried to seek help from the people of Judah, and the people of Judah denied them. They didn't want to deal with it. They just thought, they didn't want to get involved with it. They weren't coming to the aid of these wicked people who had for years and years and years and years. Just go read the 1st and 2nd Samuel. And then 1 Kings, they were not friends. Not at all. So there's a lot of language in those clay tablets, such as, "Now the Philistines were mightily afraid by my greatness, and so therefore they had to go to the Judeans, and they in their cowardice, all that kind of stuff, just playing up themselves, arrogance and so forth and so on. It was interesting to read, not interesting enough to read again. Okay, so now getting into verse 2. So it's at this time. It says, "At the same time spake the Lord by Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, and put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners, and the Egyptians and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even with their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt." And so, you don't see that very often, but God says in 3 years, this is going to happen. In 3 years, Assyria will conquer Egypt. 3 years after this point in time, guess what happened? It got conquered. It happened. God didn't make a joke here. He didn't, he didn't have Isaiah walk around naked and barefoot just because he wanted to laugh at him. He did this as a sign, and the sign came true. It says in verse 5, "And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. And the inhabitant of this isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape?" There was no escape. There was no getting away. There was no making deals. Assyria had it on their mind to take Egypt, who at the time, for one of the only times in all of history, Ethiopia actually had itself, set in a fairly decent position. You see, Ethiopia had the Queen of Sheba. That was a very short time when she reigned. It was supposed to be fairly wealthy at that time. And here, the Egyptian Pharaoh was actually Ethiopian. So that's why they're put together and they're related here. After this, you see Ethiopia never really reascends. Egypt still later tries to go against Babylon. They still see themselves as an empire. And as we spoke about, Babylon is the one that truly ends Egypt's long march through history as a great nation, a great empire. It begins crumbling here with the defeat at the hand of the Assyrians. It really is crushed when Babylon comes in later. But this burden is a continuance of the burden from chapter 19. We're still dealing with Egypt here. So even though at the end of chapter 19 God says that He's going to restore Egypt and they're going to be His people, and Assyria is going to be His people, just like the people of Israel, they will all three be there. That's not coming yet here. They still had judgment to go through, and they went through it. They absolutely went through it. And if you go over there and if you look at it today, if you look at the city of Cairo, they're still going through it from what I can see. It hasn't ended. So it says, "Whither we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape?" There wasn't one. God had set to judge them, and He judged them, and it's my belief and opinion that what they're going through now is lasting effects of that judgment. And it won't be until the millennial kingdom that judgment ends. So that is a bunch of history in Isaiah chapter 20 put together. We've got a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything they want to add or anything they want a little bit more details on?